Okay, yes, we're here.
Okay.
Thank you, Ted. Well, thanks very much to the organizers of the Ag and Hort Leap. It's a pleasure to be here. It's kind of a late entry, I think, for the speaking engagements. But anyway, I'm happy to have had the invitation and really happy to be here to share what I've learned doing what I do. So we're going to talk today, obviously, about small fruit production. And I think, first of all, I just am kind of curious about why people are here. Like, for instance, is there anybody here who's just kind of really seriously looking at getting into some commercial fruit production? A few of you, yes, okay. Okay, and backyard gardeners just want to know a little bit more about what to do with their stuff? All right, so that's good to know. I have a bit of a balance going on here. Okay, so I'll just give you a bit of my background. This is, my husband and I have a little acreage here up in between Stoner and Woodpecker, about 80 kilometers north of Quesnel. This is the farm here. We're bordered on two sides by the Fraser River. This is the Highway 97 south right here. And Trapping Creek goes down here across the south, kind of winds along there. So that's the farm. And this patch right here is David's vegetable production. So it rotates around between these two fields and this field and so on, sometimes over here. And that's our commercial vegetable production. So we sell carrots and cabbage and in the past rutabagas and beets as well to Save On Foods. There's 4 Save On Food stores in Prince George. Shoppers Wholesale and Vanderhoof Co-op are all buying our product now. And have been, I want to say, for many, many years. Where I think this is our 50th year of incorporation as a company this year, and we've been selling turnips and cabbage in Prince George for pretty much all of that time. So it's a bit of a landmark. 50 years, yeah. My father-in-law started it as a hobby, really. He was an accountant. So this is the house and build. The house is right here. The buildings, and we also have beef cattle, so the cattle corrals and everything are in this area. And this little rectangle right here is my 1 acre of paradise, most days. So that's David looks after the vegetables. We both kind of do everything to do with the beef and obviously forage harvesting and so on. And that little acre is hallowed ground for me. So what's on our plate today? These are just kind of some of the things I'm going to talk about. Just general considerations for small fruit production. That are some rules that are going to apply to whatever kind of crop you're growing. I'm going to touch a little bit on currants and gooseberries, raspberries, blueberries, saskatoons, and haskip. And if you don't know what a haskip is, stick around. You'll find out. So why do people want, and I'm going to try to go through this quickly so there will be some time for questions because I know there's a lot of material here. The last time I gave the talk, I had 2.5 hours. So I had to do a little bit of whittling, and so I'll try to move through it quickly, and if we have time at the end, then we can talk. So obviously, there's a lot of really good reasons for growing small fruit, and you're probably all familiar with all of those. In particular, my horticulture friends, I like to remind them that there are some other uses for fruit, and that's the ornamentals and building hedgerows and attracting birds to your garden. So don't ever forget a blueberry bush as that it could be an ornamental in your yard, and they are just beautiful in the fall, and they turn red, and they're a really gorgeous plant, all in their own, without the fruit. So don't forget about them. So planting the small fruit garden, and this will apply to the majority of you that are just looking for your own use around the yard. One of the rules I like to out of sight, out of mind, right? So first rule is to keep it close to, keep your little plot close to the house where you can actually keep an eye on it and manage it. Otherwise, you kind of forget about it, you forget to weed it, you don't go pick them when they're ripe, you have other issues. So there are a few considerations about where you might want to put your garden. You want to, for the most part, keep them in full sun. There are a few like the currants that will take some shade. Of course, being near the vegetable garden is always very handy, and but also, if you don't have one big space, you can scatter them around, and have bushes up against the house or over by the fence or whatever. They're so flexible as long as you can give them the sunshine that they need. So some steps to success. Variety selection. We'll start with the proper varieties for the region that you live in, know what your zone is, and know what the characteristics are of the variety that you want to grow. Some are more susceptible to disease or insects than others are, so you want to be aware of that and know what bugs are bothering your neighbors and which ones you want to try and avoid by choosing the correct variety. Soil management. If you're lucky, you won't have to do anything to your soil. If you're not so lucky, you may have to do some amendments, but you're definitely going to have to put some time into preparing it. And if you don't, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment. Nutrient management, again, pretty straightforward. We all need to eat, and that includes our berry bushes. So you can't forget about the nutrients and the quality of your soil and so on. Water management. They always need water. So have you got a well nearby? You know, can you water it from the house? How are you going to irrigate that crop? If it's a big crop especially, you know, you've got to really think about that. And pruning. Don't forget about the pruning, because you're out of business before you start if you're not ready to get out there with your pruning shears. And pest and weed control, a no-brainer. Those things are everywhere, and those of you that sat in on the weed talks know about that. And anybody with a plot of grass knows all about that. So those are the main things that I think are the most important to consider in having a really successful go at growing produce. So if you really want to think about some of the questions that you're going to ask yourself, first of all, if you're going into as a commercial basis, and even if you're just doing it on a small basis, but you think you're going to have extra that you want to market, what is the market? Who am I going to supply with this product, and am I going to add value to it? Am I going to process it or package it differently? Where's the extra going to go? And how is it going to be harvested? If you've got any significant quantity, you've got to figure out a way to get it off the bushes. So you have to keep that in mind as well. And what equipment do you have? Have you already got some sort of a crop where you've got lots of little tractors and things, or are you starting from scratch? You know, what have you got to use to manage this plot? So once you've got all those questions answered and sorted out, then you're ready to start into a nice profitable agricultural operation. So the site selection. As I said, full sun, they really like the sun. They need the sun. One of the things, this is actually all the pictures in this presentation are my own from our berry orchard. So obviously I have a nice flat site right there, but what you can't see is the way it drops away to the left goes down to the river. There's a side channel in the river there, so there's a little pocket there. So obviously I'm not going to plant in there. Cold air drops, and you want to avoid all the frost pockets that might be out in your field somewhere. And the low wet spots, none of these other than cranberries like wet feet, so be sure you haven't got any soggy wet spots out there. Take into consideration the wind, and avoid the shade if you can, again, except for the currents a little bit. So some of the preferred soils, obviously, probably the fertile sandy loams, which we've been blessed with, are the ones you want to aim for. I'm sorry if you have clay. I know you're going to have some work to do if you have clay. You are too, yeah. Because then you really have your work cut out for you, and you're going to have to come up with some solutions to work around that. Because really, I don't think any of these berries really like to be in clay too much. So there are amendments, then we might touch on those a bit later. So again, the well-drained fields, and again with slopes, you want to have a sunny slope, but not too sunny, because you don't want to cause them to flower too early in the spring and then they get hit with a frost or something like that. So you don't want too much direct sun coming in there. So a nice kind of southwesterly angle is really probably the best. And then the last thing too is the pH. With a lot of these berries, they do like the acid soil, and so you may have some other amendments that you're going to have to make there, and those need to be done in a timely fashion. And I'll talk about that. So the field layout. So when you're planning your field, you're going to look at the recommendations for the particular crop that you're growing, with the spacing in the field. How many feet apart in the row are these plants going to be, and how wide are the rows going to be apart? And the biggest indicator for me of that spacing was the equipment that I had to use. So initially, I'm looking at a 75 horsepower tractor that's so wide, and how wide my disc was to go between these rows and so on. So that's how I decided how wide I needed to make my rows, and they're at least 4 meters apart. The Saskatoons I have in are actually 6 meters apart. So partly too, I had the space. I mean, as you can see in the first picture there, I just took 1 acre out of that field. I could have used more land if I wanted to. So it was actually kind of hard to keep it the size it was, but I'm glad I did, because it's all I can manage. So overcrowding, again, this is the reason for looking at the recommended spacings. You're going to just be growing, your plants are going to be weak. There's going to be more susceptible to disease and insects. They're growing closer together. You don't have the air circulation that they need. Keep them, just keep the microbes away and so on. You're going to have more problems with powdery mildew and aphids and other fungus and things like that if they get too crowded. And then the other thing to consider in your field is how you're going to manage between the rows in your planting. I started out, as you can see on the bottom, with just cultivating between the rows when the plants were smaller. As my berries got bigger, there's grass in there now. I did seed the grass in between the blueberries, but with the raspberries, I didn't want to keep cultivating because their roots, as you know, they grow horizontally and they go on forever, and you're just causing a lot more root damage with the cultivating them. So that's where I just let the grass, in the raspberries, I just let the grass come in naturally, which may have been a mistake. In the blueberries and Saskatoons, I actually seeded an orchard mix in there from Quality West, and I just mow that every week. So.
The row cover, what's the focus on the row cover? Is that for insects or more temperature?
Berry net, bird nets. Yeah, it's bird netting. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll talk a bit about that later. And, okay. So ordering your stock. Obviously, you want to make sure you know what you're buying, and the best way to do that is from a reputable nursery. And there are any number of them in the Lower Mainland, and they're all selling the half-highs and the blueberries. They're all selling the hardy half-highs for northern climates. So they're hardy to minus 35 and 40. Most of them have been bred in Minnesota, so they know what winter is there. So yeah, I could name any number of nurseries. Of course, there's Bylands in Kelowna, and then Cato's. I bought my own fruit. I bought at Cato's, and also it used to be called Casino something or other. Now it's Morgan Creek in Surrey. But yeah, you can Google those and find any number of suppliers. And well, Sidhu is a big one that's selling planting stock.
Is that SID?
SIDHU, yeah. They're in Abbotsford, and JRT is in Surrey. Cato's is in Abbotsford, and Bylands Nurseries in Kelowna, and of course you've got Rich Bar Nursery right here in Quesnel, and they could probably get you anything you wanted, really. But I do have to say, if you're buying them in any quantity, you're going to get a little better price going to some of these other guys. Sorry, Rich Bars. Yeah, it cost me $75 to send up a pallet for one pallet on a truck. So, but they can put over 100 trees on a pallet. So if it's costing me $1 more to ship it up here, and I'm only paying $5 for that blueberry, it's better than paying $20 at the nursery up here, at Art Naps or something, right? So it's definitely worthwhile. And if you can get together with other people and get a pallet load is a good way to go. So establish, where am I at? So we're going to establish this planting that we have. Did I finish that last one? Sorry, I got sidetracked with the questions. We ordered the stock. Okay. Yeah, so avoiding the disappointment and heartache. That's like I said, you must get rid of your perennial weeds and seeds and grasses. Because you will live with that nightmare forever if you don't do it before you get your crop in the ground. And I just cannot say that any more emphatically. It's just critical. Okay, we're not organic farmers, and I used glyphosate on, first of all, on the whole area once, and then spot sprayed 2 more times. So it took me 1.5 years to get that 1 acre so that it was completely free of any couch grass, which is our nemesis. So be patient, take your time at it, and make sure your soil is really clean.
Karen, how do you stop it from encroaching again?
Well, I've got the orchard grass mix growing around the outside.
That keeps it back pretty much.
I keep
eh?
mowing that. No, you're never going to keep it out completely.
That grass
stuff
is
is
just.
nasty.
Oh yeah,
You have
definitely.
to mow it short a lot. You
Sorry?
have to mow it short a lot.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And even that, you know, I mean, in my lawn, I have it in my lawn, it just still creeps in, right? So yeah, so you just want to, and also working the soil so that you have a nice tilth in there, you know, so that the roots are going to be able to go where they need to go right off the bat, and really, you know, make a nice bed there. So now you've got to maintain what you've started, and fertilizing, of course, is critical. Your primary nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, your NPK, are the main ones you're going to be concerned about. Calcium, magnesium, and sulfur are your secondary elements. And then you have half a dozen or so micronutrients that you're also going to want to pay attention to. Fertilizing, for instance, with blueberries, actually with all of the berries that when I started them, you don't do any fertilizing the first year. It's not really necessary if you've prepared your seed bed properly. They don't need anything for the first year or so. And after that, you're going to want to soil test at least every 2 years. But I think I'll be touching on that again later too. So. This was from a different talk, but I just left it in there so you can see what a nice little, because I'm not talking about strawberries, what a nice little planting of strawberries looks like using the hill system. It's growing, growing on black plastic, and this would be a crop that you would grow, like say for a commercial crop that you would actually plant every year, and rip it out and do it again, and that way you keep it really clean and weed free. So currants and gooseberries. They are both native to Canada. The currants, I personally haven't grown. I've grown black currants in the past. I've never grown gooseberries, but they don't sound like they're a lot of fun to pick either. They're quite thorny. They grow in similar conditions to each other, and they're pretty tolerant of this. Like they don't really need an acidic soil like the blueberries do. They are the one, as I said before, that will tolerate some shade part of the day, maybe a third or up to half of the day. And a broken mottled shade is really good, so if you just have some shade trees around, it shouldn't prohibit you from growing black currants there. And that's the kind of yield you'd expect maybe from an acre of black currants in the 5,000 pound range. And then there's the jostaberry, and this is another one that's it's very hardy here. Lots of people do grow them. They're not as popular. They're a cross between the gooseberry and a black currant. And the bushes are actually bigger than the currants and gooseberries. The spacings would have to be a little bit larger than the 3 feet. You'd probably go to 4 with those.
Sorry.
Yeah.
With the jostaberry, because just growing up, I grew up with my mom always had gooseberries coming from the UK. And they used to always pick their gooseberries green. You wouldn't ripen them.
Well, there is a green gooseberry, so maybe they were green
Yeah,
gooseberries.
they were. Well, it was a green. Well, it wasn't. They weren't. If you let them go longer on the bush, they would turn pinkish. But
Okay.
we used to always pick them green. So
Okay.
with the jostaberry, what do you do with it?
Oh, they're darker. They're a darker. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a darker berry. So they also are resistant to the white pine blister rust, and I didn't mention that with the currants that is an issue if you have white pine nearby, because the organism completes its life cycle on both the white pine and the currant. So you don't want to plant them within several hundred meters of each other if you do have them. So these cultivar considerations, these will apply to pretty well all of the different fruits that you might be thinking of planting. So first of all, the fruiting season. Well, how early are they? You've got a haskip that's going to be ready in June, or you've got a fall-bearing raspberry that's going to be ready in October. You want to think about that and how you can extend your season and by growing different cultivars. You want to look at their disease and insect tolerance, obviously their mature size, so you get the spacing correct, and also the yields. so that you know what you're going to be dealing with in terms of having to market it or use it up. Also the availability of the cultivars. You might decide you want to plant something and then not be able to find a nursery that actually sells it, so you might have to do some homework. And again, I mentioned the pine blister rust already. So with the current planting, I think I've pretty much covered all of this already. They are pretty heavy feeders, so you're going to want to get some manure into the ground before you put those in, along with the bone meal, some phosphorus, and so on. And plant them quite deep. I was going to show you actually, going back, did that thing go back by itself? That picture on the right is a black currant bush. At somebody else's, obviously I don't grow them, but you can see what's happening there. He's taken a stick and jammed it up under the branch at the front because the crop was so heavy and the branches were hanging right down into the alleyway. So that to me is a pretty labor intensive little thing to have to do. So that's where some of your pruning practices are going to come into play to try to avoid that kind of a situation. And you can also see that he's not really using much of a mulch there, and he's got the grass growing right in up against those bushes. So you're going to have some issues there too, in terms of keeping that under control and not damaging your bushes if you're brush cutting or however you're handling that grass. Okay, I'm on different pages here. We're done, we're established. So maintaining this then, you probably noticed in my blueberries how there's, I have a row is about 30 inches wide with a mulch on it. I think that's something to aim for. It's going to keep away the competition from the weeds. As you can see, again, this is not my currant crop right here. I don't grow currants from somewhere else. And you can see again the weeds and the amount of competition that's going on there interfering with that crop. So, that's something that this grower might want to address with a mulch of some kind, either manure or compost or sawdust, shavings or whatever. If you can incorporate manure, that's great. This crop will take that quite well. And avoid watering them when if you've had a wet, especially if you've had a wet season, your fruit's more likely to split. So again, watch how much water you're giving them when it's at the ripening stage. It's a fertilizer. It's just equal amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. So it's the NPK. It's just a general blend. So you can have 16, 16, 16, or 20, 20, 20, or whatever, right? So pruning, as I said, is absolutely critical to keep the production going in your berry bushes. These bushes are going to last you anywhere from 10 to 50 years. So, but not if you just ignore them, So if you want to have continued production, you're going to have to be doing some serious pruning. So with the currants, what you want to end up with is about 3 canes. Eventually, you want to have your canes all staggered because it's bearing fruit on the 1-year wood. So you want to make sure that you have a certain number of 1-year-old, 2-year-old, and 3-year-old canes. Anything over 4 years old is something you're going to be cutting out. And that's common with some of the other fruits as well. I think I'll mention that later. So must be done. So now we'll move on to the raspberries. I kind of burned through the currants and gooseberries because they're not my forte. Raspberries, however, when I first started this orchard, I had in my head that I was going to grow some Saskatoons and eventually some blueberries. Raspberries hadn't really even entered the picture. I'm really glad they did. It turned out that the Ministry of Agriculture was going to be doing a trial coming up, and I had this piece of land already prepared to plant some other crops. And so when I read that they were looking for sites, I jumped on that, and that's how the raspberries got started. And it's a good thing because nobody really wants to pick Saskatoons anyway. This is really what they want, is the raspberries. So with the raspberries, it would also include all the related ones, the blackberries, red, black, yellow, purple, whichever. None of them I don't think are as productive as the red. You have the loganberry, which is a red raspberry crossed with a blackberry. And they're generally not as tasty to eat. They're quite a large, really large red fruit, and virtually thornless varieties now. They're quite hard to pick by hand, and I don't think they're all that hardy up here either. Also the tayberry. The tayberry is a blackberry crossed with a red raspberry, and they've been around since about 1979. They're really not that old a fruit, and again, they're not terribly hardy here either. But you're in that zone like we are a little bit. We like to think we're in a Quesnel zone rather than a Prince George zone because we have that little river climate going on there. And so you never really know, especially with climate change and so on. Everything is warming up. We can start pushing boundaries, right, and see what you actually can grow here. Don't be afraid to try. These raspberries in this picture are Titans. And that's 2004, so they went in the ground in the spring in 2001. And that's 3 years worth of growth, and you can see I'm working on about my 4th or 5th pail, 5-pound pail going down that one side of that, and that was just one picking. So you're gonna get really fast production on your small fruits too. So the two types of raspberries I'm gonna talk about are the summer bearing and the ever bearing. And the summer bearing is the one that most of you are most familiar with. They are fruiting on the second year wood. So the root is a perennial, the crown is a perennial. The canes are biennial, which means they're having fruit on their second year. With a primocane, which are sometimes called everbearing, which is a little bit false, they are coming up in the spring and they're going to have fruit the same year. So they come a little bit later in the fall because they have to grow first and then they can have their fruit. And that fruit on those ones will only be in the top foot or so of that cane. When that crop is finished, you can just cut off the top foot, which I do with one of my varieties, and leave it so that it will produce like a normal flora cane, and I'll have fruit on the lower half the next summer. But it won't, so I'm taking off the top that's already fruited, and it's going to fruit again like a normal one on the lower part. Generally, the reason for commercial production with the primocanes is that there isn't any thinning to do. When your crop is finished, you just mow it, right? So you get all new canes every year, and you just have a fall crop. So the reason for calling it an everbearing is when you leave it like I do and let it produce again the second summer. So then you have a summer crop, and then the primocanes are going to produce again in the fall. So you've always got the lower part and then the top, and then the lower part and then the top. I just cut off what has produced fruit, yeah.
Yeah, so at the end of that year, in the next spring, that'll grow up again?
No, it won't grow up again, but what you left there will produce fruit. We'll send out laterals and produce fruit.
And then at the end of that again?
And then it's gone. Yeah. Because once any of a raspberry has had fruit, it's dead. It has to go. Right? So this was the berry trial that we started out with, and the Ministry of Agriculture actually did the sourcing of all the varieties. I started out with 28 different varieties of raspberries. And the ones in red are varieties that were less than hardy. So eventually those were varieties that I removed from the plantation. So I had 5 rows of raspberries. They were 100 meters long, and 100 meters, by the way, is kind of the recommended length especially for a U-pick type of operation. You don't want to have rows going on forever and then people get too far away from home. So those are the varieties. The ones marked P are all different primocane varieties. So as you can see, some of them did not really pan out, weren't as hardy here. What else can I tell you about some of those? The Canby was one that is actually one of my favorites, and I got it from a neighbor who had gotten it from a fellow who worked with the ministry out near Burns Lake. And it wasn't until this year, I put that in 2005, it wasn't until the winter before last that I actually talked to that guy and found out what it was, what kind it was. And it turns out that it was a Canby. They're thornless, they're virtually thornless. They grow quite tall, and it's a very sweet, tasty berry. Yeah, so
Do you know where you can get them?
Specific, I think Art Naps in Prince George sold them last year. Yeah, because he was asking me about it. Yeah.
Are there more thornless varieties than that?
Yeah. Let's see. The Revelees are thornless, and they've got a cane on them about that big around. They grow about 13, 14 feet tall. So anyway, I'll get into that a little bit. Other thornless ones. The Novas are kind of half and half. There's hardly any on them. They're out of Nova Scotia, but I think you can buy them out here.
Do you notice the yielding amount between the berry types of berry bushes?
We're going right there right now.
Okay.
First of all, just show you again that the plantation. So they were, as I said, they were planted in 2001 in the spring. There were 5 rows, and then in 2002 I put in the other 2 rows. So we did 3, and then we did 2. So and you'll see that in my data a little bit. So when they first went in, obviously I was using irrigation. We have these irrigation pipe, 3-inch pipe that we use for the vegetables, and that's what I was using to irrigate this field. And I could only do that up until the time that the canes were high enough that they needed trellising. So once the wires went up, it just was, you just can't put that pipe, 30-foot pipe under a wire. So that's when the drip lines went in. And it's really, drip line is recommended for any of these berries because you don't want the fruit getting wet, especially a raspberry with the overhead sprinklers. So you want to try to incorporate some sort of a drip system. So the Malahat is the one on the top right-hand corner. That's what a winter kill looks like. And obviously a variety named Malahat, trying to grow it up here. That it was a non-starter. So you can see that the canes just didn't leaf out at all. But those the green at the bottom is the new canes coming up in the spring. So like I said, the crowns are perennial, and the crowns, the roots are much hardier than the top growth. So the plants didn't die out, but they weren't obviously ever going to produce because I'm just getting a primocane every year. I'm never getting a floricane, right? So that was one of the ones that went. And then just below them, the red mammoths. You can see what a normal one would look like when it's leafed out that time of year. And these obviously had not survived the winter at all. So a good indicator, you can look at your own raspberries that are growing in your yard. Mike Van Adderkum from the experimental farm did some research back in the 60s. He gave me some of his work. And one of his experiments showed that the fall growth, slow fall growth, and the leaves dropping early in the fall was a really good indication of their winter hardiness. So obviously you want them to start going dormant early, then they're going to be hardier through the winter. That's the key. So this is I'm a little bit of a data freak. I don't always do anything with the data I collect, but I like to collect data. I'm doing something with it now. Spreadsheet, give me an Excel program and I'm happy as anything. So this is some of the data that I was collecting initially. I was looking at, this is just showing the different heights. So I would, I'd measure them, this 2002, that would be 1 year after they were planted, and then 2 years after and 3 years after. And 4 years after for some of them. And as I said, some of the other ones weren't planted till 2002 down at the bottom. The prime canes, obviously, there's no data for them because they didn't grow they just started in the spring, right? So you can see how rapidly they grow. I've got half a dozen of them there. By the time they've been in the ground for 3 years, that are 10 feet tall, right? So they do establish, again, with those right conditions, your right soil conditions and everything, really well in this area. This one, I think, is just looking at the yields. So the order that they're listed in on the left-hand side is the order that they're growing in the field. So from Boyne to Reveille, that's the 6 varieties in my first row, and so on. So that's they're always in that order because that's how I know where they are in the field. I can tell you exactly where every variety is. So on the recommendation of Mark Sweeney, I started doing, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a trained researcher, so he gave me this little pointer to start collecting the data. I was weighing everything that I was picking for the first few years, but he suggested counting the number of canes and including that in the calculation. So then I started calculating the number of grams of fruit per cane that I was getting. And that's what this chart is showing right here. The actual total pounds, you can see what those are in the fourth column there. And it's pretty amazing, really, in such a short time. Some of those varieties I was getting, 80 pounds of berries from, and this is a 40-foot section. Each variety was only 40 feet. Right? Time to clean up. I was going to take that home myself. I thought it was my gift. Anyway, yeah, so that'll just give you an idea of some of the numbers. You can see those for yourself. And the numbers on the right-hand side there, that's what I started this fall. I thought, well, I'm just going to see how much the Autumn Bliss is actually producing this year after they've been in the ground for quite a while. And the weight was pretty much the same. So, they pretty much reached their maturity right away. They haven't, not like a blueberry that's going to take 7 or 8 years or something to be fully mature. These are right from the get-go. They were really producing well. So then I sorted them. I took that same list of grams per cane and I sorted them. So now you see the order here has changed, but the order over here is numerical, and they are listed in the order of the highest producer to the lowest producers. So if you want to know what I had after 3 years, what my highest yielders were, they're right there at the top. You know what? They all taste good. Okay. Some of them taste better than others. And people always ask me, what's your favorite berry? Well, it really depends what you're going to use it for. I have some that you can pick them and eat them fresh just like that, and it's like just putting jam in your mouth. They're kind of gelatinous, and they're sweet, and they feel like they've already been processed. They're so good. And yet I have others that are really firm. So if I was going to the farmer's market, I would be picking my red mammoths or something else, the Novas or something, and putting them in my little pint containers, and because they're going to keep their shape. They're a little bit harder, and they're nice round shape, very even size. So it depends on what you're going to do with them, which is my best variety. So.
Do you get those from Morton Ministry in Manitoba? The Souris berry?
I imagine that's where, yeah, they've obviously been bred out there, yeah. I didn't do the actual sourcing. The ministry actually got all the different varieties for us. So my target on those berries is roughly about 240 canes in each plant, in each variety. So I have 40 feet. I'm looking at about 6 canes per foot. It's my target, but it's variable depending on the variety. Because like I said, you've got a Reveille that's got a cane on it that big around. Obviously you could have, they're pretty vigorous. You could have more of those than you would some smaller variety, right? That needs a little more attention. So it's all very variable. Okay, so establishing this raspberry site, they are a little bit pH sensitive, so you're going to want to make sure that that's not too high. There are obviously different ways to influence that, and I think I'm going to cover that when I talk about blueberries. But the pH that they're going to like is around the 5.765. So everybody knows about pH. pH ranges up to 8 down to 4 or something. Average is 7, I think. So yeah, so they're definitely a little on the acidic side. Again, none of these things like wet feet. They do like lots of organic matter, so if you can incorporate some compost or well-rotted manure, I wouldn't suggest anything less than well-rotted manure for any of these. You want to avoid areas where there's been verticillium wilt growing. That might be crops like tomatoes or potatoes or eggplants, and strawberries and peppers, things like that, which most of us are not growing out in the field anyway, probably in the greenhouse. So if you do have these wet areas, you can, again, go amend that with a bed. raising your beds. There's tractor equipment, where you can build a raised bed with an implement, or you can just build yourself a box to put your raspberries in if there's just a small plantation or something, and get them up off the ground, fill it up with lots of this, again, well-rotted compost and manure. So the spacings, each cane was placed 2 feet apart, and a minimum distance would be 6 feet. As I said, I keep switching back and forth. My husband gets so annoyed at me between metric and avoirdupois. As I say, my rows are 3 meters apart, but here I'm saying 6 feet is a minimum. So sorry about that if it's confusing. That would be in the yard. Again, if you're using any kind of tractor or equipment or anything, you're going to need to be at least 8 to 10 feet, and taking into account that the canes are going to go out like this too. So you want to be able to get down the row. And eventually you're going to need some trellising. So we have to take that into account. And also how you're going to harvest them. If you're going big and you're going to be getting an over-the-road raspberry harvester, then you have to take that into account when you're developing your trellising and everything else. So, and their mulches, we get shavings delivered for our cattle for bedding, and from Dunkley, no, not from Dunkley's, from somewhere. And that's what I use, because that's what I have. But if you have an unlimited amount of compost or something like that, you can also use that for a mulch, and I think it's quite recommended. Keeps the weeds out. It's definitely kept the weeds out of this crop, and also keeps the moisture in. So it's a good way to go.
The rodents like that in the winter?
Sorry?
The rodents like that in the wintertime?
That's pretty early in the spring.
You kind of rake it away in the springtime?
No, I don't touch it. I don't do anything with it. When I first put it on there, I would probably put it on about a foot deep, and it just settled down to about 4 to 6 inches. And so I top it up as necessary when I think it need to. That this little spreader, I bought that a couple of years ago, I guess. It's actually used in dairy barns for blowing shavings into the stalls for the dairy cows. So we modified it a little bit so it's not blasting 10 feet. It's just dribbling it onto the row there to put the shavings on. But I haven't been able to use it nearly as much as I'd like to because of the little wee window of opportunity that there is for driving equipment on that field. By the time the snow is gone, and you can actually see where you want to put the shavings, then the ground starts to get a bit soft. You don't want to be driving tractors on it. So it's touch and go sometimes. Sometimes the job just doesn't get done because you can't get out there when the ground is the right amount of moisture in it.
Do you want to try to put fresh mulch on it too?
That'd be the ideal. In different sections, I wouldn't do all of it every year. I went for 5-6 years without putting any on, and it was no problem at all. And the thing is, if a weed does grow through there, it's so easy to pull it out because it's only rooted in the shavings, right? So it's just very easy. They don't get into the soil. So we want to maintain this with the shavings. Start with that 6 inches at least. And all these crops will need about an inch of water per week. And again, preferably the drip line. And then again, you have to consider how you're going to control the weeds between the rows if you're going to go with the grass or if you're going to cultivate it. The nutrients, well, obviously a soil test. If there's no soil test, which most of us don't do very often, you go to Plan B. And Plan B is just throw on a 10-10-10, a 16-16-16 with some micros in it or something like that, and just use an all-purpose fertilizer. And I don't know if you picked up the sheet I had there. I do have a reference on there for a couple of places that we use, the soil test lab that we send stuff to, and also TerraLink is where I buy a berry blend fertilizer. And your local co-op sells TerraLink products. They'll be able to get that in for you if you wanted. And if your soil is light and sandy like ours, sometimes you do need a higher amount of nutrients because they're going to leach through the sandy soil a lot more readily. Your nitrogen is the biggest. If you didn't do anything else, get some nitrogen on them in some shape or form, whether it's manure or chemical fertilizers. But you do want to split the application with this and hit it at first thing in the spring and then again at bud break. Be careful you don't want to fertilize anything too late in the summer. Like once you get, by the time the fruit's starting, you're starting to see fruit, you don't want to be putting any fertilizer on there because they're not going to be able to get into dormancy in time. You're going to have too much fresh growth later in the fall and that will winter kill. So as I said before about the canes being perennial there, that's, I guess I've already covered all that. There are two ways to prune your raspberries. You can do that in a hedgerow system or in a hill system. So most of mine are hedgerow. I have done a couple of varieties in the hill system, and I wish I had done more of that to begin with. I think it provides a lot more aeration between the canes. With a hedgerow, you've got a solid row of growth, and when those new canes start coming up beside the flora canes, they make a wall there. There's really not much air circulation going on in there at all. So if you're going to, I think pruning by hills where you keep 6 or 10, where each cane was originally planted, that's your crown. You want to keep 6 or 10 canes coming up there and go down 2 feet and do that again. So then you have some air movement between the crowns, right? The canes were originally planted 2 feet apart, yeah. Yeah, and when they reproduce, now you're looking at, it's over 7,000 or 8,000 canes out in the field there. Bear in mind that every fall, they all have to be cut out because they've all had fruit and you've got to start over again, right? So that's what I do all fall. The primocanes, well, another way to control the suckering, so with that double delight over there, which is a primocane, that's why they're all coming up. There's no old canes there. That's how much I pruned out. Those are all the new canes, and keep the base, the center part of your row quite narrow. It just makes, the people that come out to pick, you can see in the mature row down below how easy it is to walk between the rows, and it's not like you're going into a big bramble bush like Peter Rabbit. It's a lot easier to pick these.
Do you trim your canes down, keep them all at a certain level?
So yes, so I do usually do that in March or before the leaf buds break. So I like them to get through the winter with their full height, just for protection. So in the fall, again, you want to leave the canes that have had fruit, leave them as long as you can because they're still pushing nutrients down into the roots. So don't, as soon as some people say, well, as soon as they're finished fruiting, you can cut them out. Well, the research has shown that if you leave them a little bit longer, they're going to put more nutrients back into the soil, into the crown. So leave them as late as you can. So late September, early October, I usually start and go in and cut out everything that had fruit on it. And then in March, I'm going to go in and I'm going to just take my grass shears and I just walk down the row and I just take everything off like this at this height. So it's nice and even because each one of those canes is now, they're going to send out a lateral. So by the time they send out their lateral that's going to have the fruit on it, now they're at least another foot, and some varieties 2 feet higher than that. So people have to be able to reach the fruit or it's just going to go to waste. So they're all cut off. And then the other thing I do in the spring is thinning. So in the fall, all I've done is take out everything that had fruit on it, and I've left all of the new primocanes that were in the row. And then the reason I do that in the spring is because if there's vole damage, if I've lost them, if they've died for winter kill or other reasons, I'm not taking out a whole bunch of stuff in the fall and then losing more over the winter. So I wait till the spring, see what's been killed by predators or whatever, and then I can thin them out to the numbers that I want, which is like 6 to 12 every foot or so. And there, we just covered that. So if you're not going to use trellising, then you really want to probably cut your canes back a little bit shorter. Just because they're going to be a mess otherwise if they're not supported in some way. And there's all kinds of methods of trellising. You can use 1 wire, 2 wires, 3 wires, make a vase shape. I have 2 on each side. pretty much anything that'll keep them upright. When you do prune them, you want to cut them as close to the ground as possible. There's little cane borers that live down in right near the crown, so you want to cut them as close to the ground as you can. Don't leave those little stubs, and also fungal spores and so on are down there. So you want to take that, and when you have pruned it, get it out of the field. So all that stuff gets picked up, carried somewhere else, and burnt, or composted in a. We have an old silage pit. Sometimes I dump stuff in there, or I'll just burn the whole pile. Okay. So I just left this picture in here. If anybody's driven down to the lower mainland in the wintertime, this is what you see, fields and fields and fields and fields of these raspberry canes. The ones on the bottom are from Abbotsford. The ones on the top right are mine. Because I thought, oh, that looks really cool. I think I'll try that. And of course, the reason they do that is because they're harvesting mechanically, right? So they want everything to be at the right height and width and everything. So that's what they're doing right now this time of year is they're out there. The guys are out in the field tying those canes to their wires. So I thought I would try it. I don't think I'm going to ever do it again. It was really hard to harvest the fruit when you're hand picking because they wouldn't separate. You know, if you're in there picking raspberries and you can go like this and get in the canes and so on, and when they're tied like that, you really can't. But the advantage, the one thing that it does do is it's left more fruit on there because you haven't cut the tops off, you've just bent them over. So there are more opportunities for laterals to grow, and they're all going to grow straight up like this. They're not going out this way. So you can try it. It's fun. It looks cool. So 2002, I put in a few blueberries. I started with about 65, and this was not part of a trial. This was just something that I wanted to do for myself because I didn't have time to go out in the bush anymore and pick wild blueberries. So I thought, well, I'll grow some in my yard. So I put in 65. And they all did really well. Those are the varieties that I started with. And you can see from the picture, it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what their growth habit is like. So that's another one of those factors you want to take into consideration when you're choosing varieties. The one on the left, the North Sky, is more closely related to a wild blueberry, so it only grows about 18 inches high, and you can see that already in the growth habit in the 3-year-old plant. So now I have about 400 plants altogether, and this is highly theoretical. If I were getting 5 pounds per plant, which they're supposed to produce 3 to 7 pounds, most of these varieties, I'd be looking at 2,000 pounds of fruit from 4 or 5 rows of blueberries. I'm not getting anywhere near that. One of the reasons has been an establishment problem with some of the Patriot plants that I put in a few years ago. Just didn't take off like they should have, and they're the ones that produce 10 to 20 pounds per plant. You know, like they're really big producers, and I didn't get the production that I wanted from them. And I've since discovered one of the reasons is the soil. It just wasn't acidic enough for the blueberries. They need it, down closer to anywhere from 4.8 to 5.2, 5.3. And over time, the pH will go up, and that's another reason you need to continue with your soil testing on a regular basis because this pH does change. Yes.
We do downstairs quite soon.
Oh yeah. Okay. So there isn't a lot different about the maintenance, other than the differences here in the acidity and so on of the blueberries. So I don't need to talk about that anymore. Same thing with the planting your there's a debate about when you're planting your bushes that you definitely should pull all the flowers off if you're buying new fruit in 1 gallon pots or something that you're going to plant. When you do get it, you really should be taking the flowers off the first year and maybe even the second year, or at least taking half of them off the second year and allowing the plant to get established and let the roots develop a little bit. Some people will say cut the branches back by 1/3 and other things, and I think that's really relative. That you need to judge that for yourself. How big the plant is, how much water you're able to give to it to keep it going, and so on, because really you're kind of setting it back if you do cut it back, right? I've been told to speed up a little bit here, so. Again, maintaining people talk about these fertilizers and stuff, so I put a picture in of what ammonium sulfate actually looks like, because it's nothing magical. It's just, but if you've never used it or seen it before, you kind of, oh, what's that? You know, does it come in a box? You know, whatever. And this, as far as the blueberries goes, the importance of your soil tests, and sometimes tissue culture. I have done tissue cultures as well to find out what the yellow leaves are, and that can be due to so many different things, from lack of iron, and the iron uptake is affected when the pH is too high. So, you know, that means you got to go back and check your pH and add some sulfur to the soil. Some of these other fertilizers that are like 210024. The 24 is the sulfur, but the sulfur is not really acidifying the soil at all. It's just feeding the plant's sulfur needs. So if you're really going to amend the soil, you're going to have to add some elemental sulfur to it and work that in. And those things are quite slow acting. So when I say get the soil ready for your plantation, you want to be doing that the fall before you intend to plant, at least the fall before, because it does take time for that stuff to take effect. Irrigation, very similar to the raspberries. And pruning, it's so critical in blueberries to get that pruning done. And for me, it's a challenge. Again, I've got this little window of opportunity between the time the snow disappears and they start flowering and leafing out, you know, and you kind of want to get it done in there. So I've started now. The picture on the right was just last fall, and I've been assured that I'm not really doing any harm, and I'm just getting them done as soon as I can get at it in the field. And the thing about gardening or farming is you more or less you do it when you can do it. It doesn't always get done. It doesn't always get done at the right time. But if you do get it done sometime, awesome. You're ahead of the game. Any time is a good time, right? Can't always do it when it's optimum time, but if you can, you know, just try to get it done. And then be sure to get those canes off the field too, because there is a disease in them. And I don't use, I should have probably over the years been using dormant sprays to control some of the fungus and so on that I have out there. You know, it does slowly build up, and but I can honestly say I haven't sprayed any of these crops. They've been in for 13 years now, and I haven't sprayed any of them with anything to control it. And they're still doing reasonably well. I'm not unhappy with the kind of production that I'm getting from it. So you can get away without doing anything, especially a few bushes in your yard. Pollination key. I just had a beekeeper start bringing hives. Okay, bringing hives down to me, and if you can get bees into your orchard, that's fantastic. I noticed a huge difference in the size of the berries and the quantity of the berries. So just those are the Saskatoon varieties that I put in. I also put in Smokies, but I took out the Smokies. I didn't really like them. They were kind of my least favorite, and so I took out a row of Smokies, and I had enough space there because they were so wide apart that I actually got 2 rows of blueberries in there instead, so it was a bonus. And they're probably the least popular in terms of a U-pick. So here's, I don't know if you want to jot that down, if it has some meaning for you. The number 2, just to figure out the number of plants you might need per acre. It's just a little formula figuring out the square footage. If you're planting them 3 feet apart in the row and your rows are 10 feet apart, you're going to need 1,400 plants, 52 plants to plant an acre. Okay, which is obviously this is the square footage of an acre. So you're just going to divide that number. Okay. I do want to touch on this one. We've had a lot of questions about this, and it's hugely popular. I think it's going to be, well, like I say, the plant of the week. It's going to be the plant of the next few years. It's really gaining in popularity. Haskap berries are from Siberia. University of Saskatchewan's been doing a lot of breeding and sweetened up the flavors. They've got quite a few varieties now that actually taste pretty good. They're pretty resistant to diseases and so on. pH can be a little higher, quite a bit higher, anywhere from 5 to 8. They're very tolerant of the pH. There's an incredible market in Japan for Haskap. They use Haskap for absolutely everything. The way we use our cranberries in baking and juices and you name it, they're using Haskap berries. There's a huge market there. You've got some Matt Ziemer, of course, right here in Quesnel at 10 Mile Lake with Heritage Acres. He's got a pretty good plantation there of haskip. If you have never seen them before and you want to see what they're all about, I suggest you go and see him. There's a picture of some of these are from his place here actually. So that's some of them growing on the bushes. This brown plant here, just to show you how tolerant they are. He says this plant is going to bounce back. It's just been reacting to drought conditions, and it goes completely brown. But he said next spring it'll just look fine. So it hasn't died out at all. These pictures were taken in September, and this is a fruit that's ready in June. So these berries have just hung on. Obviously, they hang on to the bushes for a long, long time, right through the summer. And this is just one that you can just give you an idea of the color of the leaves in the fall. This is one that I have planted in amongst my blueberries, and I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit crowded there. So again, this is another one of the things to your steps to success, thinking about how you're going to control some of these pests. This little guy has done me a tremendous amount of damage the last, I can't wait till spring to see what happens, but certainly the last year they were terrible. And these are some of my raspberries. You can see how he's demolished the canes here. Bears are not a problem for me. These guys are a problem for me in the wintertime. And I use a 3D electric fence to keep them out of the blueberry patch. It works just fine until the snow gets too deep for the fence. But by then, the deer aren't wandering around in the fields anyway. So that's taking care of that. The birds, I found after using a couple of other methods, scare eyes and recordings of hawks in the field and so on, finally decided that a physical barrier is the only way to keep birds out of your berries. And since the blueberries are the ones I value the most, that's where I use them. The raspberries, it doesn't seem to be a problem. I don't notice the losses there. The wasps in the fall are probably more deadly than the birds are. This is my 93-year-old mother helping me pick up the nets one summer. Yeah. I started out with this type of net. It's a nylon netting, and it's really bouncy. It's really hard to fold it up again and put it away. I didn't like it at all. I don't use it anymore at all. But these woven nylon nets are awesome. And I think on the contact sheet I have here, I think I put the name of the company where I got those from Neil Carter down in Summerland, I think. So this is the list of fruits that are potentially marketable if you are interested in getting into a little bit of a commercial production in some of your berries. I've spoken with Pat Bell a number of times about his new fruit winery. If you haven't heard about that, he's hoping to start up next year. This spring, actually, he's doing some planting. And these are the particular fruits that he's especially interested in. I have haskip right at the top because he will pay you top dollar for every haskip berry you can grow at the moment. I don't want to be his spokesperson by any means, but I would suggest if you are interested in seeking out a market before you go ahead and do some planting, that you might want to contact Pat and maybe work with some sort of a contract agreement with him, or see what his needs are. I know he's looking at 12 to 15,000 pounds of fruit in the next couple of years, and then as the winery production increases, he'll be looking at about 40,000 pounds of fruit that he's needing to supply the winery, and he'll only be growing a small portion of that himself. So he's going to be looking to source it in the community. He's eager to work with local farmers, and there is an opportunity there if you want to pursue it. Having said that, there are lots of other opportunities for marketing your fruit, as you see with the U-pick or processing and syrups and whatever. So he's not the only game in town, but he's a new game in town, and you might want to talk to him. So that's it. Sorry to rush through it, but that's what it is.